So yeah, that one is pretty Entertain is pretty emblematically Sleater-Kinney.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's that in terms of we're going for the synthesis of them, then that was a good choice. I approve of that one.
I mean, it's loud and catchy, and like, and the crazy thing is like I feel like it's danceable too. Like,
Ooh,
I
yeah, it kind
mean,
of is.
every Sleater-Kinney show that I've seen, like you can't stand there and not move. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like it's an indie rock sort of dance style, I guess. It's not really,
Hmm.
it's not. I don't know how else I would describe it, but it's you can't when you are experiencing them live and they play a song like that. Like I challenge you to not like tap along or like just move your body in the rhythm of the song. It is
Yeah,
it's intense.
yeah. Do you? There's so many. They're so like deliciously complex as personalities in this band. Um, and is there somebody in the band who you've identified with most of the band members?
I feel like I identify with Corin the
Hmm.
most. I would actually like if I had to rank it, I guess I'd say Corin, then Janet, then Carrie. If only
Hmm.
because Corin, I feel to me something about that voice, just like that
Yeah.
intensity, the intensity of her voice, and the fact that she she didn't speak as little as Janet did, but definitely not as much as Carrie does. Carrie sort of feels like the spokesperson for the band for me in some ways, while
Yeah.
I would consider Corin to be the lead singer.
Me too.
Even though I don't know if I think sometimes Carrie refers to her as that. They don't. I feel like it's a title, a label. They don't really care, but
Hmm.
um I think like she when she speaks in interviews, I just feel like there's a lot going on in her brain that she doesn't let out all the time. She
Hmm.
might also be a Scorpio too, which would I feel like
Really,
she is. Yeah, I'm gonna look that
it would
up
just
now
make it
because
would make so much sense that you would
I
identify with her
mean,
then.
yeah, there's that quiet intensity.
Are you a double Scorpio?
No. Well, I mean, I've got Scorpio in other places in the chart, but not my moon or my rising sign. I
Oh,
think my
okay.
Mercury is. Yeah, November 9th, she's a Scorpio.
No kidding.
Yep.
Wow. Should have known. Should have
Hmm.
known. Yeah, she's got that. She's got that about her. She's got that energy about her. I see it.
And I also like I listened to her two Corin Tucker band releases. She like I guess her
Mm,
equivalent of a solo project. There's some pretty
yeah.
good songs on that too. Although I will say that every single project that they did away from each other
Mm-hmm.
just still kind of pales in comparison to when they all come together. I mean,
Because Carrie had the Wild Flag project too, right?
yeah, which I mean that album's
Wild
not
Flag was
bad.
pretty good. Yeah,
And Janet was I think their drummer too, so with both Janet and Carrie on that.
that sounds right. Yeah,
But it's just not the same.
yeah. And to think that I was reading that they were Carrie and Corin were like it was the Slater-Kinney was their side project to primary projects that they had going at first, right? And then when those other projects that they were independently in ended, they just kind of fell back on Slater-Kinney, and that ended up being the thing.
Yeah, at a certain point they realized that like the way they wanted to make music together was the way they always wanted to make music.
Hmm.
I believe they were also in the very very beginning of the band. I think they were also romantically involved, but like that's not something that people really talk about too much because it feels kind of I don't know. Like I think it's their music is way more interesting than all
Hmm.
that sort of gossipy stuff. But they have a long history together, and they're still good friends and still
Yeah,
obviously if you're going to be in a band together for this long.
sure. And I mean, to a certain extent, probably maybe we're able to have that attitude about the fact that they were romantic, the fact that we know that they were romantically involved at some point. Maybe it is somewhat of a benefit of them not being as famous as they could be,
Yeah.
to the point where the people who do care about them and the people who would bother to know about those sorts of things are going to kind of be respectful of their privacy on that matter. I think it's a credit to the community of people that listen to this band.
Yeah, they might also be the longest running all female rock band, I think. Although I don't know because their more recent album, I guess it depends on who is technically in Sleater-Kinney now. Because the most recent album that they put out, they invited a bunch of other musicians, and I think it
Hmm.
was the first time in the history of them recording something that there was um, No, it wasn't. It was the first time where a large portion of the album there were a lot of that men also played on the tracks. There is a
Mm-hmm.
song on one beat that Stephen Trask provides backing vocals on. I think that was
Mm-hmm.
the first time that a male musician ever appeared on any of their recordings. But I'd have to double check if they're. I think they may be the longest running female rock band in the history of rock bands.
Where do you think the politics of the Woods, where how does the band's politics manifest itself in the Woods in particular?
I would never consider it a political album. I think, I mean, they've had, I mean, there's, they definitely are, advocates for, reproductive health, and they're very liberal in terms of their politics, very pro environment. There's a song, I mean, I can't remember the name of the song, but that they did write a song on a previous album that
Mm-hmm.
was about, protecting women at their concerts.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would obviously attract a lot of female fans, but also a lot of male fans, and probably some non-binary fans. Though at the time, I don't think we were really using the terminology when those albums came out. But
Mm-hmm.
they were seeing, people attending these concerts and just being sort of completely disrespected and violated and assaulted by men who were at those concerts too. And they did whatever they could to sort of stand up for that.
Right.
And there is a song on The Center Won't Hold that is about Christine Blasey Ford,
Mm-hmm.
and I like the sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm gonna say.
Sure. I mean, that's the thing about all art is political. Sure. I mean, I
Mhm.
believe that. I believe that to be true. You're making a political statement in one form or another, whether it's conscious or subconscious, when you're,
Mhm.
like expressing yourself in that way. But there's a fine balance.
I mean, because that becomes the real tricky thing about art. When you create art that is political, or that is about something that you feel personally attached to, or like you feel
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
passionately about, but like, what if the piece of art that you create like doesn't appeal to people in turn? What if the content is good but the form isn't, people aren't as big a fan of? Like, then it becomes
Right.
weird, because I feel that particular song, I'm not a huge fan of that song, but I feel really terrible for judging that song, because I know
Right.
why they wrote the song, and I know what the sentiment was behind it. And
Yeah.
even though I am not a woman, during the Kavanaugh hearings, I certainly felt the same way that I had similar feelings, though not
Hmm.
identical. And I think that it was tricky, because I was like, oh, I don't know if I like this song, but like, and how do you reconcile those two things? Because now I feel like a total
Right.
jerk for saying something like that. And there is this, I mean, I guess you could say the most political song on the Woods might be Jumpers, if only
Hmm.
because it's sort of like the mental health awareness song. But I mean, that's a great example to me of a song that's about sort of raising awareness of mental health, but it's also like a kick-ass song at the same
Hmm.
time. Like, when the two come together, it feels like it's such a huge success. But at the
Yeah.
same time, also on the album, I feel like there is, I would say, maybe the only Sleater-Kinney song that I think is definitely about sex,
Hmm.
which is Let's Call It Love. um I mean, thinking back, I'd have to like do a really thorough listen of previous albums. I'm sure that it's in
Yeah.
previous songs, but that is the one that feels to me like it is overtly about that. I've never heard them say too much about that song, other than to talk about the fact that it's, essentially a 12-minute long jam session.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know that this album took a lot out of them. I know Carrie Brownstein writes about it in her memoir, how, like, I mean, why they had to take a hiatus. I mean, she was not doing well. The
Hmm.
recording process was rough, but then also, the touring process was taking its toll on her. I
Yeah.
saw them um in Philly at a place called the Starlight Ballroom, which I don't think exists anymore. But I remember, I think it was like in August.
Hmm.
I think it was right before they were going to take their hiatus, and they announced these shows, but they didn't announce the hiatus. They announced the shows. I remember getting tickets right away because I'm like, oh my God, I have to go see them. And then they announced that they were going to call it quits for a little while, and tickets suddenly became very hard to come by. And that show, it was so hot that day in Philadelphia, and the place
must have
did
stunk.
not have air conditioning.
Oh,
and
brutal.
I remember
Brutal.
At some point during the concert, they went backstage and brought out water bottles and threw them out to the crowd and was like, please share. Like, we don't want people fainting. Like, please share this
Pre-COVID
water.
world.
I stepped outside and I took my t-shirt and I grabbed the bottom of it with my two hands, and I bet you I was able to wring out 8 ounces of liquid. Like, that is how sweaty I was from that show. I mean, it was amazing, and also like I must have been the most dehydrated person in the world when I got out of that show.
You gotta get some electrolytes, man. Gotta get your Gatorade.
Yeah, seriously.
Go to the bodega and get a limon pepino Gatorade. That's the best one. That's the best one.
I've never had that one.
Oh, it's good. It's good.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on Janet? What's your take? Like, what's your feeling?
I will never know what the terms were of like how it all ended. From the outside, it looks to me like, I mean, she was a big proponent of having St. Vincent produce that album.
Really?
Yeah. It just seems to me, though, like in the process of her having St. Vincent produce the album, St. Vincent's production methods found a way to render Janet obsolete. I mean, she's on the album, but barely. I mean, and also like the way, the levels that were set for recording. I mean, on the previous albums, you hear Janet. Like, I mean, there's a friend of mine who I saw Sleater-Kinney with once or twice in Chicago, said that you can hear tones to her drumming. Like, there's almost like a melody to her drumming. And I think that, I mean, she really, when it was the three of them, that is always going to be the golden age of Sleater-Kinney to me. It's and so regardless of how it all ended between them, I could definitely see Janet's perspective. Like, the band's going in a different direction. I don't want to go in that direction. She wasn't going to come right out and say they don't need a drummer like me, or they've made it clear that they don't need this sort of drumming.
Right.
But I mean, listening to the most recent album, I mean, Janet could have played drums on that album. It really does feel like there was something about the production of that one album that I could see where Janet felt like, even though no one said it out loud, she was being told that like her contributions weren't
necessary.
It's not that they weren't necessary. It's just that they didn't have the same sort of value they did in the past. And I think I remember reading an interview where like she had some availability issues during the recording, so she wasn't around as much as she usually had been. Damn. So, I'm not going to put blame anywhere, but I do definitely feel like the band is not the same without her. And there is a song off One Beat called Step Aside that, as far as I'm concerned, they can never perform again, because there's a line in the middle where Corin wails, Janet, Carrie, can you hear me? It's sort of a call and response song. And I don't think they played it when I saw them on the Center One Hold tour. But I thought to myself, if they do, that's just rude.
Yeah, that'd be messed up. That'd be really messed up. Okay, so let's get into Perfection. All right. So when you got the brief to choose your 4 perfect albums for this first go around, what was the rubric you were using? What were your standards that you were holding these albums to?
I mean, it's a messy rubric, and it frankly differed for each album.
Michael, bless this mess. Bless it.
I'm gonna embroider that for you, or what's it?
I'm gonna give you 17 pillows embroidered with bless this mess.
or was it needle cross stitch?
Yeah. No.
Cross stitch you would bless this mess. I mean, what's crazy is for someone like me who loves lists and, having objective standards for things. I mean, the other albums I was considering, I would have picked for very different reasons.
Say more words about that.
Say more words. I'll say more words. Because for me, I'm not someone who latches on to lyrics. So I'm
Okay.
not looking for literal meaning from an album when I experience it.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily a narrative isn't required.
Hmm.
No skips isn't required, but it just has to feel like a complete package, and it has to yeah, I feel like we talked about this earlier this season, that term of completeness, and it's hard to
Hmm.
really define what that is, because in some cases that completeness was, a surprising change of genre,
Right.
or
Yeah.
it was actually a full narrative, or it was, like as is the case with this album, it is, you know, all tracks set to 11. Like it
Hmm.
is, I mean, there's
The
there's
most.
there, even the Modern Girl, the song in the middle, which feels to me like it's the most low key song on the album,
Hmm.
and a song like Steep Air towards the end, which, depending on the way you listen to the album, sounds like it might not belong, but on subsequent listens, I've grown to like it even more.
Yeah.
um it just feels like this album, this is them live, and I think
Mhm.
ultimately that's why I chose this, because it sounds like who they are, or who they were
Yeah.
at that time, or who I will always want them to be for the rest of
Mm.
time. And it's, I
Yeah.
mean, and that, I mean, I think it checked off a few of those boxes. It was a surprise. It didn't seem like it was them. It feels like it all is coming from the same emotional place. uh and it's, it's to mention a phrase from earlier in the season, it feels like we talked about whether albums are like all cookies or if they're a meal.
Yeah.
This feels like 10 like double decker brownies, like
Yeah.
drenched in caramel and whipped cream, and like just a bucket of chocolate sprinkles on top of it. And
Even
I love my dessert, so
Prue Leith would say that's worth the calories.
oh, I hate when she says that.
I love when she says that. I think Prue's underrated. Prue doesn't get, put some respect on her name. Put some respect on Prue Leith's name, because she is carrying that Mary Berry torch like a champ, I'd say.
She is. She walked into a difficult situation and she is making the most of it. So
I am impressed. I am
yeah.
impressed.
Oh
It's
yeah.
really amazing. I'm gonna give you a big fat worth the calories just because I know you hate it.
Because
Worth.
I mean, am I not wrong? This album is like 7,000 calories, right? It's
Yeah,
not. There's
that's a good
nothing.
point.
There's no
Hmm.
like diet or low cal version of the woods.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying about perfection, like a case for the perfection of a piece being its ability to distill the essence of the artist.
Mhm.
Um, and I think we'll probably see that a lot in the albums that people bring to this space. Is like, this makes me think about earlier in the season with Purple Rain. Like, Purple Rain is Prince. And I think you're right. Like, this is kind of the best of them. This is the best of Sleater-Kinney. All the best
Mhm.
the things that they do really, really well. They
Yeah.
do extremely well on this album.
And also, something that I know about myself is anytime an artist can channel raw anger and do so artfully, I
Hmm.
feel like, I mean, that's for, this, we don't have time for a therapy session here, but for whatever reason, I definitely gravitate towards music that sort of allows me to sort of work through my anger in some ways.
Yeah,
And this is, I mean, this is an album that does it. I mean, this is, this is a stomping down the sidewalk of the city street,
yeah,
listening in your headphones and just thinking like, stupid world. I hate this world, and just
mm.
sort of, and being able to get those feelings out so that I'm not taking out those feelings on actual people. You know what I mean?
On your husband. Yeah,
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 exactly.
or the cat. Like,
Yeah,
this is,
because
let me work this out myself.
yeah, because I'm smart enough to know that the feelings are not, there's no rational, there's
Hmm.
like, anger is not a rational emotion.
No,
And I think an album that allows me to just sort of explore that and just run wild with that in a way that's not harming myself or harming other people,
yeah.
that's always going to speak to me.
For the record, we believe in therapy, Michael and I. We
Oh
we
yes,
totally
yes, yes,
we
yes,
totally
yes.
believe in that. We don't mean that to say that you should just listen to music to deal with your emotions, but it's a useful tool in the toolbox.
It is, and maybe that's also why, I mean, some of my other, that's why I'm like a fan of early Pearl Jam. That's why
Hmm.
I'm a fan of, I feel like there's a lot of anger in certain grunge bands. I feel like there's a lot of anger there. I feel like there's also some anger in Nine Inch Nails, another one of my favorite bands.
Totally. Yeah.
So like whenever an artist can artfully channel that, like I am all in.
You're here for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's another delicate balance of making it useful anger, and feels like it acknowledges the fear underneath, because obviously anger being a secondary emotion
Mhm.
to fear, feels like anger's most useful when it's acknowledged, when it can hold hands with that fear.
Hmm.
Which I think I see that in this. I see that in Sleater-Kinney's whole bottle of work,
A
body of
bottle
work,
too, there's
a bottle of work. Have a bottle together. Um, I think you see that useful, that kind of that righteous anger, that righteous indignation. You can see it in there.
it's a, but at the same time, like,
Hmm.
I have had dance parties with roommates to Sleater-Kinney songs. I mean,
Yeah.
Entertain, I mean, it's a song, and the song after Roller Coaster is actually a really good song to
Oh
dance to.
yeah, that's
That
a good
that
one.
feels to me like a very sort of, I'm thinking back to times when I would go to I think they were called making time parties in the early 2000s, where they'd be
Hmm.
playing like the sort of danceable like new wave meets indie rock, like bands like the Rapture
Sure.
or the Faint.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
uh those, I mean, that's like danceable indie rock music, and I guess I sort of loop some of their songs in with that.
I could see that. You mentioned how it doesn't necessarily have to have any skips.
Hmm.
But you also mentioned how each one of these is a double-decker brownie covered in caramel and whipped cream. So
And a
I guess
bucket of chocolate sprinkles.
and a bucket of chocolate sprinkles. Um, so does that mean there are no skips on this album for you?
uh in the past I have sometimes skipped Steep Air.
Hmm.
um and I
Gotta be in the
mean,
right mood.
I will say too, like, I mean, if you're not ready for the 12 minutes of Let's Call It Love, then like,
Yeah,
maybe you forego that one. Maybe you stop at Roller Coaster and just call it a day for a little bit.
sure.
And you can't listen to Let's Call It Love without listening to the final track, Nightlight.
It would
Nightlight?
seem a little
Yeah.
wrong. Yeah,
Yeah, because
Nightlight,
they flow right into each other, and it's they feel like a package deal. Though
mega
when they
song.
played them live, I think the first time I saw them live after The Woods came out, they played those songs back to back. But
Hmm.
I think the subsequent time I saw them, they played Let's Call It Love, and then it morphed into Entertain.
Ooh,
So they like did a jam. They don't really do the jam sessions anymore, I don't think, and I don't think they played that song live in a long time. But
wow. Okay,
yeah,
that's cool.
yeah.
That is pretty cool. There's a craft. There's a obviously studio craft, and there's like stage craft, and I like this conversation that you were having around how they sound live as opposed to how they sound on the record, because it almost, when you really think about it, it's almost like two different bands. Like each band, each artist sort of has two manifestations of themselves, and like the connection, the distance between the two is pretty fascinating.
Mhm.
Um, like I love when you come to know a band and you can identify which song they're going to play when you're seeing
Hmm.
them based on which instruments they bring out. Having that connection to like the actual tools being used to make the music is a pretty special relationship to have with a band.
And I think also maybe one of the things, speaking of sort of like, relationships, I feel like one of the things that I miss about the band now is that it really, in their like heyday, it really was about the connection between all of them. I mean,
Hmm.
you go to some other albums prior to The Woods, and the guitars and the vocals sometimes sort of like Carrie and Corin would sort of like wind around each other. I mean,
Yeah,
there would often be melodies that would be and lyrics that would be going on simultaneously, like sort of weaving around each other. And the guitars, it feels like a very complex sort of call and response they would have
yeah,
with each
yeah.
other. And that, I mean, I know in more recent, I think for the writing of their two most recent albums, they wrote in a different way. They wrote solo. They
Hmm.
weren't collaborating as much. So there are now, it sounds like there are Carrie songs and there are Corin songs, but there are not Sleater-Kinney songs in the
Mm,
same way that there used to be.
yeah,
And part of that is, Carrie's got her own career. She's been in a bunch of TV shows, and
yeah,
she's produced and directed things, and she wrote a book, and she's doing a ton of stuff. Corin had a bunch of side projects going on. Also,
yeah.
Corin, I think, has 2 children, who I think are now like at almost adult age, but still there's that.
Yeah, you got a
Like,
family. Like the ability to be a rock star and have a family and like have other things going on is pretty insane. It's pretty insane to be able to do that. There's just doesn't seem enough hours in the day, but people freaking do it.
yeah, I mean, I've never been a rock star, but I do feel like something tells me that family life plus the rock star life are it's hard for those
Right.
two things to coexist.
Yes. I don't think that's a stretch of a statement. I think it's a good shout.
I'm no
Um,
expert, but I've seen a few rock documentaries in my day.
I'm feeling how, I don't know, they feel kind of workaday in some ways too. Like
Mhm.
it sort of feels like their energy is like they're going to it, like they really are craftspeople. Like I get that craftsperson energy from them, really focused on just making the best thing they can make, no matter what that thing is. Like whether it's music or not,
Mhm.
you kind of get that ethos. There's a DIY thing, that DIY energy.
Mhm.
Um, that I think it's palpable when you view their whole bottle of work.
Yes, bottle of work. Give yourself a bottle on the scorecard for
Well,
that.
I'm gonna have a bowl.
Yeah.
I get one more bottle, a bottle of work. Thank you. We've talked a lot about your personal connection to this. We've talked a lot about kind of like where you think they are in the scope of rock and like how they make rock their own. Should we tabulate your points and see how close you might be?
But yeah, let's do that. Let's see if I win.
And
This is
then
all
I'll give
about
you a
winning,
chance.
right?
It's about winning. Yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah,
mainly a
yeah.
competition.
That's what I
Um,
figured.
so I'll tabulate the points here,
Okay.
and then I'm going to give you an opportunity for a closing argument if you feel like you need one, and then I'll decide if you've made a strong enough case. Okay?
Okay. Yeah, I want to win. So okay.
I know you do, dude. Okay. So for my recap of Sleater-Kinney and the Woods, you gave me 9 out of 10 foxes, which is quite a few foxes, and you also gave me a bottle of work. So thanks, bro. In terms of your points, we have a big fat worth the calories for the 12 double-decker brownies that are the songs in this album. I gave you 17 embroidered bless this mess pillows. I gave you 16 points for bringing in Stephen Malkmus and the Jicks, bless them. And then I gave you 2,005 points for Fisherman's Friend showing up in this pod. So I think you're very close, if you haven't already gone over the edge. Anything else you want to say as a closing argument for why The Woods is a perfect album?
I know Sleater-Kinney is not a one-size-fits-all sort of band. I know they don't have the same sort of mainstream appeal that a lot of other bands do. But if you are looking for an artist who rocks hard, I mean,
Yeah.
so hard,
Yeah.
and just is able to channel raw emotion into their music in a way that just it seems unfettered,
Mm-hmm.
and yet at the same time still able to make catchy songs about relationships, about politics, about sex, about love. I mean, that to me, and this is maybe the most personal part of all, if you're able to channel anger in a way that seems useful, in the way that prevents people from taking out their anger in unhealthy ways, then I feel
Yeah.
like that is a successful album. And they're also just amazing live. So there's also that. That's all I have to say.
Well said. Well, with that all taken into account, Michael, I have news for you.
What's that?
I think that The Woods by Sleater-Kinney
Mm-hmm.
is indeed a perfect album. It goes all the way to 11.
So I won.
You won.
So
You won
awesome.
the game, man.
That's,
You won
that's
the
all
game.
I care about. That's all I care
Playing
about. Bye.
the
See you later.
game. See you. Got to play to win, man. Got to play to win, and you did. You did. Proud of you.
Oh man, I haven't won anything in a long time.
You win this one, Osinski. Well, thank you for bringing this one in, and I was so glad that we could start your first album that you presented for this first season, as it had to be Sleater-Kinney. It did. It had to for you.
Well, there's another band I could think of that would have been first, but we'll get to them in a subsequent season.
That sounds good. Yeah, we'll get to them all. But that does it for the first season. Man, what a whirlwind it's been.
We learned so much. We had some great conversations and varied conversations too.
Yeah.
Dear listeners, I hope that you have enjoyed the variation. I mean, talking to each person, depending on the album and who the person is, it was just a complete, 7 technically, completely different conversations.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I could talk about music for days, and there was a period in my life where I definitely was a little bit snobbier with the way I talked about it, but it has been so great to just be so open to hearing what other people have to say about these albums and about music.
What they love.
Yeah. I mean, even Third Eye Blind.
I mean, even Third Eye Blind. It's great to focus on. It's great to focus on the things that we love. Like the things we're fighting for, the things worth making a case for, and it's been pretty inspiring. So, thanks for joining us. If you listen to the other episodes, and we'll have more for you soon. This is fun to do. I enjoy doing this with my friend Michael.
And I enjoy doing this with Tyler. And we are going to be back in the spring. Yeah. So, if you got any questions or comments, or, if you want to talk to us, if you think that you have a good case for an album, just email us at thisonegoes to11podcast@gmail.com. That's spelled out, this one goes to, and then the number 11 podcast@gmail.com. But you can see it all in the little description in Spotify.
You can find us. And we're going to play you out on one last, play you out. What does that mean? I don't
know. That's like salad days for me. Like, what does that phrase even
mean? We're going to play out on the album, or the song that I chose as the standout track for The Woods, which is right smack dab in the middle, incidentally, and it's Modern Girl. It's, and I'm glad we listened to, I'm glad we have a little bit of contrast for the second one, because it's not emblematically Sleater-Kinney, but I think there's a lot of tenderness in the song, and it shows how big their hearts are, and it does move, though. It's got a good groove to it.
It's also a little sarcastic too.
Yeah.
And it's a sing along. People usually sing this along with her at the shows.
I will when we see them. I will sing along.
Awesome. When we're seeing concerts again.
when we're doing that. Yeah. So this is Modern Girl by Sleater-Kinney. Thanks for tuning into This One Goes to 11, and we'll see you very soon.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody.